Hey, good morning. This morning we're going to be doing the Prince of God. This we're going to look at. We're going to look at some Jacob and Esau and maybe some prophecy on how it is that affects us today. We'll go to Genesis 32 is where the majority of our reading will be from this morning. So Genesis 32, this is where we were at last week. We were actually talking about the covenant that Jacob and Laban had made, and this takes place right after that. And chapter 32, verse 1 says, "And Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, 'This is God's host.' And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, 'Thus shall you speak unto my lord Esau. Thy servant Jacob said thus, I have sojourned with Laban, and stayed there until now. I have oxen and asses and flocks and men servants and women servants, and I have sent to tell my Lord that I may find grace in thy sight. And the messengers returned unto Jacob, saying, We came to thy brother Esau, and he cometh to meet thee with 400 men with him.'" So we're going to go through the majority of this chapter later, but remember when Jacob had left for Haran, in Mesopotamia, when he had gone to Laban's house, he'd also had a vision. That was the one with the angels and the ladder. Right? We got to know that. He named the place Bethel. Now on his return back, he sees another vision where he's met by the angels of God and recognizes them as a host of God, and therefore he names the place Mahanaim, which means literally in the Hebrew a double camp or two hosts. So one of the hosts, of course, was Jacob and his family, and the other was God, as he was with Jacob then and there. Now, according to verses 7 and 8, "Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him, and the flocks, and the herds, and the camels, into two bands, and said, If Esau come to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape." So he prepared for the worst to happen because he didn't know what Esau was going to do to him upon his return. So he divided his family and livestock into two companies. In the event of an attack, at least one of them would escape, okay? Now, Seir, which would later be called Edom, is the old dominion of a people called the Horites. And you can look up Deuteronomy 2:12 to find that out. The Horites formerly lived in Seir. However, if you read about Jacob and Esau and how it is that Esau came to have the dominion of Edom, the Bible's not clear on how Esau came to dispossess the Horites. But we do find Esau living in the land of Seir upon the return of Jacob. Jacob has returned here from at least 20 years at the house of Laban. So this is what's going on. Anyway, some people will point to the book of Jasher to fill you in on the details on how it is that the Horites were dispossessed by Jacob or Esau. But being that I can't really verify the authenticity of Jasher, I'm not going to quote it here, but that would be Jasher chapters 47 and 57, I think, do fill you in on the details. If you take that as canon, that is. Now, according to verses 13 through 20, "And he lodged there that same night, and took that of which came to his hand at present for Esau his brother, 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 kine and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses and 10 foals. And he delivered them into the hand of his servants, every drove by themselves, and said unto his servants, Pass over before me, and put a space betwixt drove and drove. And he commanded the foremost, saying, When Esau my brother meets you, and asks thee, saying, What art thou? And whither goest thou? And whose are these before thee? Then you shall say, They be thy servant Jacob's. It is a present unto the Lord Esau, and behold, also he is behind us. And so commanded he the second and the third, and all that followed the droves, saying, On this manner shall you speak unto Esau when you find him. And ye shall say, Moreover, Behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with the present that goeth before me, and afterward I will see his face, peradventure he will accept of me. Well, here Jacob actually sends his brother as a gift 550 animals divided into 5 groups. If you understand the way the Bible lands were back in ancient times, this would have made Esau a wealthy man alone. Just the gift here would have made him a very wealthy man. Verses 9 and 12 through 12, Jacob prays to God, where he reminds God of his promises and asks for deliverance from Esau if Esau plans to kill him, because Jacob's not sure. But he says here, he is, verse 11, "Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me and the children with the mothers." Jacob's in a bad spot, and he doesn't know if this is certain death or not. So, Jacob is sorely distressed here. Verses 24 and 32, we have here, "And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and has prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, Tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, Wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And as he passed over Peniel, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. Therefore the children of Israel eat not of the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew that shrank." Now that is a tradition here, and it's not outlined by Bible food laws, just so you know. So that's a tradition the Hebrews here would have kept in remembrance of the night of wrestling. I've often said that the guy got off with a pressure point, so I didn't see it as a fair fight, but that's just me. But anyway, and it really is. I mean, that's the definition of pressure point. But nevertheless, this account here is brought up again in one of the minor prophets. We'll go to Hosea 12 and take a look. And this is where it starts to get interesting. So Hosea 12, let's start at verse 1. "Ephraim feedeth on wind, and followeth after the east wind. He daily increases lies and desolation, and they do make a covenant with the Assyrians, and the oil is carried up from Egypt." Now here we know Ephraim, of course, is a nickname of Israel, being that the northern 10 tribe Israel kingdom here, the largest landmass in northern Israel, or the northern 10, was Ephraim. So that's why Ephraim is usually named this way. And what it means is the entire house of northern 10 tribe to Israel. And notice the charges God's bringing through the prophet Hosea to Ephraim. He sees that they feed on wind, or that they try to sustain themselves with nothingness or vanities, and that the east wind is what he follows after. Now, if you check almost every Bible commentary out there, and I've checked quite a few over the last week, everyone says that this east wind is indicative of, among other things, well, no, and the commentaries leave just one thing. The east wind here, if you go through the translations and all that, it means a destructive wind, something that causes waste, right? And that is true because this east wind word is used again in judgments coming from God. However, if you go to the end time prophecies of other prophets and Revelation, you also see that the east, the cardinal direction east, also has something to do with idolatry. It usually does. You know the famous verse where the rivers dry up, making way for the kings of the east, right? You guys know that one? That shows that Israel is being influenced, at least at the end of the age, by Eastern religions, false religions, right? So keep that in mind here. Most commentaries will skip that, but we recognize anything from the east usually means something that's bad for us, and it usually is complemented by pagan or false worship. So anyway, the word covenant is used in this verse as well. And notice it's been translated here. If you look at your Bible, covenant is translated to the word treaty. So here's another condemnation God's bringing upon his people Israel, as we discussed last week, for making contracts and or foreign alliances with strangers. You see, so here's another thing that's being brought down on Israel as a charge from God to them. And this here is another witness to the condemnation of contracts with foreigners. And as a matter of fact, if you know the history of Israel right here, it was King Hoshea who actually tried to free himself from the oppression of Assyria by allying themselves with Egypt. That's what had happened. And that's 2 Kings chapter 17. Verse 2, the Lord also has a controversy with Judah and will punish Jacob according to his ways, according to his doings, he will recompense him. Now, verse 2 shows that God has a controversy with both Jacob, Israel, and Judah, and he will judge them accordingly. And some people like to put Judah on a higher pedestal than Jacob or vice versa. But you'll notice that God does have a controversy with both houses, both. And both of them do get punished. So it's not a case of God having a favorite. Usually people let Judah off the hook and saying that he never got punished because after all, the kings and queens are still on the throne, and they have been, as the case of any history of Europe will show you. But Jacob and Judah do have their punishments, and they do. God's not treating them differently. Right now we're just dealing with Hosea, and he's talking about what it is that's going to come down on the heads of Ephraim or 10-tribed Israel. Verse 3, he took his brother by the heel in the womb. In his strength he had power with God, yet he had power over the angel. He prevailed. He wept and made supplication unto him. He found him in Bethel, and there he spake with us, even the Lord God of hosts. The Lord is his memorial. Therefore turn thou to thy God, keep mercy and judgment, and wait on God continually. So there's the verses here that are recount what happened from what we read in Genesis 32. And they're significant both to the people whom Hosea is addressing and to us, the progeny of Jacob. We'll get into that this morning. So why is it that Hosea has chosen to put that little excerpt of what happened in Genesis right here? So Hosea verse 12, for the most part, details a controversy God has with his people due to their actions and attitudes, mainly that of forgetting God and his law. And verse 3, we said, he took his brother by the heel in the womb, and by his strength he had power with God. Now the prophet reminds them of God's divine election concerning the boys, Jacob and Esau. Okay, and that was the case of divine election. And notice that while in the womb, Jacob took his brother by the heel. Okay, now Jacob gets a bad rap as one of the forefathers all the time for being conniving or having guile. But since here he has his heel in the womb, this can't be shown as any guile on behalf of Jacob. Being that this is happening in the womb, before he was born, God had already assigned the boys different destinies, which you can read about in Genesis 25. So this is a strong foothold with a doctrine that isn't preached too much anymore of predestination. You see, God has divine election. It happened before the two lads were born. In other parts of the Bible, you can find 3 or 4 witnesses of that divine election before any of these guys had a choice in the matter. Now this is, look at the words, he had power, in both 3 and 4 here of Hosea 12. He took his brother by the heel, and by his strength he had power with God. And verse 4, yea, he had power over the angel and prevailed. And you see those, and a good one with center column references or a companion Bible or something, it's going to show you that there's something going on with that word had power. If you go back to Genesis 32:28, what is it that God said to Jacob? And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and has prevailed. So you see there's a parallel here, but it gets more interesting than that. This is the only instance of a Hebrew phrase that is Hebrew number 8280 in Strong's. The only instance in the entire Bible. Okay? As a matter of fact, I have the printout here from Strong's. 8280 is this. Sarah, that's spelled S-A-R-A-H. Okay? In the Hebrew, it would be Sarah. To prevail, to have power as a prince. That's the case word here. Have power and prevail. That actually comes, don't think of the word Sarah as the name, the proper noun. The name Sarah, Abraham's wife, it was changed with the H. That H there on the end, of course, means a female noble, a princess or queen. And you know what happened, who Sarah gave birth to. So that fits that. 8283, Sarah, the same as 8282, Abraham's wife, Sarah. Okay, so there's Sarah, but then here, this word 8280, this has power as a prince. It actually comes from the root 8269, which is Sar, S-A-R. So that first part of the word is a head person of any rank or class, captains that rule, a chief, general, governor, keeper, lord, master, taskmaster, prince, ruler, or steward, right? So when Jacob's name was changed, it was changed to Israel, meaning in Genesis, a man who has striven with God and has prevailed, as well as strives with men and prevails, right? So nationally, Hosea here is reminding Ephraim that they are Jacob's seed, and as such, they are royalty. Here, he tells them the nation is a prince who rules with God and whom God rules, right? Because of that little Hebrew word there. So Hosea 12:6, therefore turn thou to thy God, keep mercy and judgment, and wait on thy God continually. Hosea says in verse 4, yea, he had power over the angel and prevailed. He wept and made supplication unto him, and found him in Bethel, and there he spake with us. So us who? You see? Notice Hosea says that when God spoke to Jacob back in Genesis, he's also speaking to us, who are Jacob, national Israel, who retains the birthright, right? That's the us here. Hosea is very clear about who it is he's talking to, and he's telling the people that when we look back at our history, when God spoke with Jacob, God spoke with us, right? What a blessing it would be to know who this us here is in Hosea 12 then, right? Because as soon as you know who the us is, we as kingdom believers know this Bible cover to cover is addressed to us. Every prophet makes sure that we know who this us is. In this case, it was Jacob. God speaking to Jacob spoke to us. And that's Hosea talking to national Israel back then. So today I'm talking to national Israel, and I'm echoing exactly what it is Hosea was saying to Israel of old. So what's Hosea saying? What's Pastor Reed saying? Well, if you look at chapter 12, Israel, we're in big trouble because of the things we've done as a nation, right? Ephraim was the northern kingdom of 10-tribed Israel, and if you know the history of that kingdom, they accepted the golden calf as an object of worship. That was one of the biggest controversies God had with these people. And according to Hosea 12:1, Ephraim feedeth on wind and follow after the east wind. And verse 7, he is a merchant, the balances of deceit are in his hand, he loves to oppress. And Ephraim said, yet I am become rich, I have found me out substance in all my labors, they shall find none iniquity in me that were sin. That's the response to the controversy Hosea is bringing forward. The charges here. So these were things Israel of old were caught doing. And that's what we're doing today, right? So if you look at verse 7 and 8, he is a merchant, the balances of deceit are in his hand, and he loves to oppress. So Israel of old had a controversy, God brought a controversy forth because they'd made foreign alliances, hoping that would get them out of a tight spot, with both the Assyrians and Egypt. And of course here oil is carried into Egypt, which makes it an international trade agreement. Israel was told not to get into bed with foreigners. In more ways than one. Here, it's an economic trouble. 2, apparently, Ephraim, if you look at that word merchant in verse 7, a good cross-reference Bible will give you a number 1 there. Go to 12:7 on the 1, it says, or Canaanite. Or Canaanite, right? So this is not necessarily that Ephraim is a Canaanite. It's that Ephraim is acting like a Canaanite. Now, you'd have to do some serious word studies to figure out how that word merchant and Canaanite are linked. Strong's isn't going to be enough. You'll actually need, when they have to, you'll go back to the Septuagint, which is the original Greek of the Old Testament, right? The LXX. You go back to that and you're going to start saying, when you see the Greek word used, they'll have to come out and find different instances within the historical literature of the world, Greek, And they'll have to find that instance and how it was used in order to put two and two together, because sometimes you don't get two witnesses in the Bible alone. One guy did do that, and he goes all the way back to the Odyssey, one of the oldest Greek literatures in the world. I think Gilgamesh beats it out, but that's Babylonian mythology. But here is the word merchant here is the same Greek word used in the old poem. And this is Odysseus after he's making his way back to Ithaca, right? You guys know the Odyssey. Okay. Now, if I will say, this is one of my favorite books of all time. Read this as a kingdom believer, and you'll start reading about our own history. I know there are certain embellishments in it, but as far as I'm concerned, these are our people writing about our people. These are just age-old superheroes. It's interesting stuff. Odysseus says, I passed 7 years in the country and made a fortune out of the Egyptians, who were liberal with me, one and all, but the course of the 8th I fell in with a rascally Phoenician, a thieving knave who had already done a great deal of mischief to men in the world, and I prevailed on this by a spacious rogue to join him on a voyage to Phoenicia, where he had a house and an estate. That word Phoenician there translates to the exact same word the Bible used in the Greek, merchant. This is a Canaanite. If you read the Canaanite histories, you'll see that they actually end up going up the coastlines off to the land of Crete, which is exactly where this book takes place, the Aegean Sea. So apparently the word merchant here, the word Phoenician here, and the word Canaanite here are all the same thing. And if you study the Phoenicians, you'll see that they were pirates. They were known to have bad back alley deals. As a matter of fact, this Phoenician sells Odysseus for a good price, or he tries to. Odysseus uncovers the plot. However, I said all that to say this. Hosea is saying Ephraim's behaviors make them like the Canaanite. And here, economic deceit is one thing that they're charged with. And then Ephraim says, I've become rich, I've found me out substance in all my labors, and there's none iniquity found in them. So here's an excuse that Ephraim has worked hard for his wealth, and it's not that he's been cheating people, it's that he's worked hard and that he's gotten his dues. But that's not the case, and it actually comes down all around the northern kingdom for that. So, what do we do then? How do we right the wrongs and escape judgment? You know? Or do we escape judgment? We don't right wrongs to move forward to escape judgment. We're all going to take a hit for that as a nation and as believers. There's no way out of that. But we move forward and right wrongs so that we as God's children can then please Him. Right? So what is it that national Israel needs to do according to Hosea? Well, look to Jacob, right? Isn't this what Hosea is reminding of us of here? He's telling us our history. So we should, as a nation then, put forth the effort or prowess that Jacob put forth to obtain the blessing, right? Just as our forefather did, and in doing so, God told us that we would prevail. As such, Hosea brings this little episode up to explain that the tenacity of Jacob is something we should have in order for us to claim our blessing as princes of God and as the princes of God who rules with God, you see. So that's the concept of dominion that I always preach about how it's not only divinely bestowed upon us by God as a command, but it's also found in our name. You see, all we have to do is just claim it, just as Jacob strove for that. In both the Old and New Testaments, the covenant people are called the Israel of God, right? That's Old and New Testament theology. Galatians will give you a hint for that one. Therefore, if we recall Jacob's triumphant struggle as a witness to who we are and what we're to do, we too then must be seen struggling for the blessings, knowing of the victory, while all at the same time knowing we are princes and friends of God. And as such, we are the people over whom God rules and the ones of whom He's promised the blessings to. So Israel, according to what Hosea is telling us here, and what God was telling us when he spoke to Jacob, be the people who claim the name Jacob, Israel, and be the name of the people who proclaim dominion in the name of the Lord. That's all in the world Hosea is telling us here as he's reminding us about Jacob's struggles. He's telling us, look, Israel, you are the physical seed of Jacob, therefore look to your father and do what he did. Struggle for the birthright, claim the blessing, and move forward as a nation. God was speaking to us when he spoke to Jacob. That's the whole point of knowing who Israel's identity is. Because everyone else can read this and say when he spoke to us, you see, but we know when God spoke to Jacob, God spoke to national Israel here in Hosea's day, but now he's also speaking to national Israel in this age. The best thing we can do is learn from our forefathers and follow his example. Right? That's all in the world Jacob's talking about. Now you will see as you study this out, I'm sure if you read a great many books that are both kingdom identity literature and, secular, anybody that doesn't believe as we do, you'll find some books. Now the interesting thing is, these people aren't outright wrong when they're trying to make the blessings of the seed of Jacob anything but a bloodline. You see, and that's a big argument I come across in almost every book I read, is that we know the bloodline and we know of its import to us and how it plays out through the ages and cover to cover in the Bible. However, the scholars that can't see that fight tooth and nail to wrest away the concept of bloodline from Jacob's blessings to that of a spiritual blessing. You see, and it's not that they're absolutely in cahoots with the Jews, or the Jewish people. It's that they want the people of Israel who don't know they're Israelites to find hope in the book, while at the same time they're moving this bloodline thing out of the Bible so that it can apply to normal everyday Christians. You see what I'm saying? It's not that they're absolutely wrong, and it's not something that I would toss the baby out the bathwater with. You know, there's a book I came across, and I meant to bring it up here with me, but the guy is really arguing against the reason or the absolute necessity for Jacob's seed to be a bloodline physical progeny thing. You see, and I'm sure to his congregation that's a boon because it doesn't leave them out of the blessings, you see, but in the same time, trying to make a universal doctrine out of it, it ends up being an adulterated gospel, another gospel. So the seed line is there, and it plays out throughout the whole Bible. There's no need to attempt to negate the thing or toss it out because we understand it, and it's a concept we have. That's why when we read about Hosea and Jacob and Esau and all this, we know who we're talking about. We know who those people are now, right? So sometimes when you come across books that try to make the seed line go away because it's an inconvenient truth, what they're trying to do is actually get something in the get something across to their listeners because they don't know that they're Israel to begin with. And then it's a tragic thing because it's changed my mind about a great many authors in and out of the kingdom when it comes to expositions and work on the Bible, because then it's not that they're malicious. They just don't understand as we do. And it's quite helpful to know, of course, to whom the Bible's addressed, which is something we're always stressing that is easily found if you would study the Scriptures. A prayerful study of the Scriptures will tell you who Israel is in this age. Very easily, very simply. That's all I had for today, folks. I told you it'd be brief because I was supposed to have heavy machinery this weekend, but I don't. So anyway, that's all we have. We'll close in prayer.